We've already created some auto-enter fields with our housekeeping fields. We have the timestamp create and modify and the account create and modify. Each time a record is created, the creation information is automatically entered. And each time a record is modified, the modification data is updated. We're going to expand your horizons and show you what you can do with auto-enter other than housekeeping fields. We're going to start with the serial number field. It's probably the most important field in your database as far as relationships. We're not covering relationships right now. We're just going to go ahead and start off with serial numbers, which are typically used in relationships, because a serial number is an auto-enter value. It uniquely identifies every record in your database. It's kind of like a Social Security number, but better. So you may be thinking, I'm going to use Social Security numbers in my relationships. That'll uniquely identify people, or maybe an employee ID. Well, you can't really do that because often Social Security numbers and employee IDs are reused. And so if you have one person retire and another person pick that up, well, they're going to see each other's records, and that's no good. In addition, Social Security numbers and employee IDs are entered by hand. And so you could enter a Social Security number or employee ID incorrectly, create some related records, and then go, oh, that's wrong, change it, and then you'll orphan all those related records, and that's no good. So you really don't want to use any fields as key fields for your relationships that you enter into from browse mode. A serial number is generated automatically and is automatically unique as long as you set it up correctly, so that it will be something that's divorced from the data, that's unique, and you won't ever have to worry about it. Now, some people may even think you can use something like a first name and last name combined, but that really won't work because it's not going to uniquely identify a record because there's a lot of John Smiths in the world. So you don't want to do that. And certainly it's a lot worse than a Social Security number, but a Social Security number still isn't good enough. So we're going to go with the serial number. Always use these for relationships, at least your structural relationships. So let's go into Manage Database, and we'll type in serial. We'll just call our serial number field serial for right now because it's really not a key field in a relationship. We'll probably rename it later. And you could do text or number. A lot of developers use number, a lot of them use text. I'm going to use text because of several reasons, as we'll find out. So we'll hit create, go into options, and in the auto enter section we're going to go to serial number. And remember, this is where we did our housekeeping fields, creation and modification, timestamps, and accounts. So when you check serial number, you'll get generate on creation or commit. 100% of the time, or at least 99% of the time, you're going to choose on creation because that will generate your serial number as soon as the record's created. On commit creates that serial number as soon as the record's committed. That means that you have to commit that record. And we know what that means. That means you have exited all the fields by clicking somewhere on the layout where there's no fields, or hitting the enter key on the keypad, or changing to another record, or changing to another layout, or even closing the file. Those all commit the record, and that's when that serial number get created. And the problem with that is serial numbers are generally for relationships. If you don't generate that serial number right when you create the record, then what's going to happen is you're not going to be able to create relationships right off the bat until you commit that record. So on commit's really for people who don't want holes in their serial number ranges, like you might create a record and go, oh, I didn't want it, delete it, and that way you didn't use up a serial number. But serial numbers aren't for on display data. It's really behind the scenes, so don't worry about that. I haven't seen a situation in my 20-year career where I want to use on commit. So you can pretty much disregard this choice and just leave it on the default. Now you could leave your next value as 1 and increment by 1. You could leave them this way if you want. You can of course change your increment to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but again, there's really pointless because these are for relationships. You don't care what the numbers are. There may be a scenario, but I can't think of a good example where you go, ah, that's where I'd use this. There really isn't. It might be a very specific situation for your database. Most situations are just serial numbers. They're used for relationships, so you wouldn't change this increment by. But I would change this. Even though 1, 2, 3, 4, as it creates your records and it increases that value, that's going to be unique. I like to be able to identify my data. So I'm going to put 3 letters in front of it because I'm going to have multiple tables eventually. And so if I have 10 tables and 10 sets of serial numbers, I want to be able to identify that serial number outside of the context of the table. For instance, I might collect all those serial numbers into a return separated list, which is often called a multi-key, which we'll cover in the intermediate and advanced tutorials. If I collect those all into a return separated list, I can't identify that unless I have something in there. I like that to identify it with that value. And some developers don't care. I do, because I often collect these serial numbers like that, and I want to identify them without going, wow, that's a serial number, but I don't know which table it came from. And then since this is a text field, I'm going to put some leading zeros. If I don't, it's going to sort like a number in a text field. I want it to sort like a number in a number field. And if we make every number in a text field the same number of digits, well, it'll sort correctly. In other words, if we didn't put these in there, we just took the highlighted part out, a 1 would sort and then followed by a 10 and then followed by a 2. But this way with the leading zeros, you're going to get them all sorted in the way they would sort as if it was a number field. And so FileMaker knows that this part will not be incremented until you get to the tens. And so then that will change to a 1 and this will change to a 0. Then you get to the hundreds. It will keep using, and eventually when you get to a very high number, you'll have no zeros left. And this won't get touched at all. Only the last value will get incremented. So you're safe to do this. It's meant to be done. It'll work flawlessly. So I also want to make sure you understand that in order to do a multi-key, which is a very important technique, you have to have your serial number as a text field. Now, you don't know what a multi-key is, but we will cover it. And since we can't really cover everything at once, we have to cover serial numbers now and not later. Well, we have to just plant that seed that you need a text field for several reasons. One is for all this leading information, and another is for the multi-key. Now, you also want to come down here and check prohibit modification of value during data entry. That will prevent you from accidentally changing that serial number, whether it's manually or through a script or through an import or something like that. It will prevent this from being modified. And then in validation, we're going to quickly go over here. We want to make sure it's not empty and it's unique. Not empty because you might import and forget to import into that field, so we want to make sure it's not empty. It's got something in it. And unique, you want to make sure if you do an import, you don't accidentally duplicate your serial numbers, or you might duplicate them if you change your next value, because you can come in here and change this to a lower value. You just want to make sure that your serial numbers really are unique, and all of these options will make sure you get that. So there you go. There's all your settings for your serial number, and we're going to go into the next section into some more details about serial numbers.